my lunch break that Tuesday, I drove home for what I thought would be a simple task. I had forgotten a folder with important documents on the kitchen counter, and I told my supervisor I only needed a short personal errand. I believed I had everything under control. I had no idea that within a matter of minutes, every belief I had about my life, my marriage, and my closest friendships would collapse in the most devastating way imaginable. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps our channel grow and allows us to release new stories every single day. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing that caught my attention was a car that didn't belong there. It was parked crookedly near my garage. I felt a strange tightening in my chest, but I told myself not to overreact. My house was usually quiet during the day. My husband worked from home, and most of our neighbors were at work. As I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the silence felt heavier than usual. There was no music playing from the office, no sound of typing, no voices, just quiet. I called out my husband's name. No answer. I walked through the living room, then into the kitchen. Everything looked exactly as it had when I rushed out that morning. The coffee mug was still in the sink. The chair at the table was pushed back at the same angle. It felt as if time itself had paused. Then I heard it, water running upstairs, in the bathroom. The master bathroom that my husband and I had shared for 8 years. At first, I tried to force logic into the situation. Maybe he was just taking a shower. Maybe a pipe had been left running. But my stomach twisted when I remembered the unfamiliar car outside. My steps slowed as I climbed the stairs, each one heavier than the last. With every step, an invisible pressure built in my chest, making it harder to breathe. As I reached the hallway, I heard something else besides the running water. Soft voices, whispering, intimate. My hand trembled as I reached for the bathroom door. A part of me wanted to turn around and walk away, to pretend I had never heard anything. But another part of me needed the truth. No matter how brutal it would be, I opened the door. Inside my bathtub were my husband and my neighbor. For a moment, my mind refused to understand what my eyes were seeing. Their bodies were intertwined under the water. Steam filled the room. The shock was so intense that everything felt distant, like I was watching someone else's nightmare instead of my own life. Then my neighbor lifted her head and saw me. Her face drained of color instantly. My husband followed her gaze and froze. That was the exact moment my old life ended. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not move. A strange calm spread through me, cold and deliberate. Without saying a word, I stepped back, closed the bathroom door, and turned the lock. The quiet after the lock clicked was deafening. For a few seconds, I simply stood there in the hallway, my back pressed against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it on the other side of the door. Then the whispers started. First, muffled panic, then my husband's voice low and urgent, then my neighbor's trembling reply. I didn't listen long enough to understand the words. I already understood enough. My name is Nia Carter, and at that moment, I was 34 years old. I had believed I was living a perfect life. I had been married to Marcus Carter for 8 years. We lived in a quiet townhouse subdivision just outside the city. I worked as a claims adjuster for a major insurance company. My routine was predictable, safe, and familiar. The kind of life you build when you think nothing truly bad will ever happen to you. Across the street lived Danielle Brooks, my neighbor. Her husband, Terrence Brooks, worked long hours as a plant mechanic. They had 2 young sons. Danielle and I had grown close over the years. Coffee on weekends, shared recipes, watching each other's houses during vacations. I had trusted her with my home, my secrets, and my heart. I had trusted Marcus with my entire future. That trust shattered behind that locked bathroom door. From the other side, a fist pounded softly, then harder. "Nia, please," Marcus called. "Let's talk." I did not answer. Instead, I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed we had shared for nearly a decade. My hands were trembling, yet my breathing had slowed. Something inside me had gone numb, as if my emotions had stepped aside and left only clarity behind. My eyes drifted to Marcus's phone on the nightstand. He must have left it there in his hurry. We had never used passwords between us. We believed in transparency. I picked up the phone and unlocked the screen. The messages were endless. 6 months of texts. 6 months of stolen moments. 6 months of lies built on top of lies. There were plans to meet while I was at work. Jokes about how busy and predictable I was. Messages about how safe they felt using my own home. One message from Danielle burned into my memory forever. She had written that I was too trusting to ever notice. My hands shook harder as I scrolled. Then I saw what turned my shock into ice-cold resolve. Messages about money, about hiding assets, about how Marcus wanted to make sure I wouldn't take half when he left me, about waiting just a few more weeks before filing for divorce, about starting a new life together. They had not only betrayed my heart, they had planned to destroy my future. From behind the bathroom door, the begging grew louder. Marcus promised explanations. Danielle cried that it was a mistake. I did not respond. Instead, I opened my contact list and found a number I had dialed countless times for casual conversations and neighborly favors. Terrence Brooks. The phone rang once, twice. He answered on the second ring, his voice confused but polite. Naya, is everything okay? No, I replied calmly. You need to come to my house right now. There is something you need to see. The minutes after I ended the call felt unreal. I could still hear movement behind the bathroom door, the faint sound of shifting water, the scrape of porcelain, the low murmurs of panic rising into arguments. Their voices blended with the hum of the air conditioning, creating a strange, distorted soundtrack to the moment my life fell apart. I stayed seated on the edge of the bed, Marcus's phone cold and heavy in my hands. I kept scrolling through the messages, each one cutting deeper than the last. 6 months of deception, 6 months of coordination. They had synchronized their lies perfectly. Gym sessions, late meetings, migraines, overtime. Every excuse had been rehearsed, like a script. A soft knock sounded from the bathroom door. Nia, Marcus said quietly, his voice strained. Please. This is insane. Let's talk. I did not answer. Instead, I stood up and walked to the bedroom window. Through the curtains, I watched the street below with detached focus. Every passing car stretched my nerves tighter. Then I saw him. Terrence's truck pulled into the driveway and stopped. My pulse finally spiked. I walked downstairs slowly, every step steady, despite the storm raging inside my chest. When I opened the front door, Terrence stood there in his work uniform, grease on his hands, concern etched across his face. Nia, what's going on? He asked. You sounded scared on the phone. For a moment, the words stuck in my throat. Once I spoke them, there would be no turning back. His life would shatter alongside mine. His children would suffer for what their mother had done, but the truth did not belong to just me anymore. Danielle is here, I said, inside my house, with my husband. Terrence blinked once. What do you mean with your husband? He asked slowly. I held his gaze. I found them together. In my bathtub. I locked them inside. The color drained from his face in an instant. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His knees bent slightly as if the ground beneath him had shifted without warning. Without another word, I turned and led him inside. The house felt smaller now, heavy with secrets. We moved into the living room and sat down on opposite ends of the couch. I placed Marcus's phone between us on the coffee table. It's been happening for at least 6 months, I said. Everything is in there. Terrence picked up the phone with shaking hands. Neither of us spoke while he scrolled. His breathing grew uneven. His jaw tightened. At one point, he covered his mouth as if he were about to be sick. I watched his world collapse in real time, mirrored perfectly in what I had already felt minutes earlier. They had mocked us, planned their futures, discussed money, talked about the children. Terrence's voice finally broke the silence. How am I supposed to tell my sons? He whispered. I had no answer. We sat there surrounded by photographs of our shared past. Barbecues, holidays, smiling faces frozen in frames that now felt like lies. From upstairs, the argument behind the locked door grew louder. "This is your fault!" Danielle yelled. "You insisted on coming over today," Marcus shot back. Terrence stiffened. "They're still up there?" he asked. "Yes," I said quietly, "and they're not coming out yet." Terrence scrolled deeper into the message thread, his expression shifting from shock to something colder and far more dangerous. His fingers moved slowly now, deliberately, as if his brain were struggling to keep up with what his eyes were reading. I watched every muscle in his face tighten while he absorbed the truth, piece by piece. Then he froze. He turned the phone toward me and pointed at the screen with a trembling finger. "She said they already picked out a townhouse," he whispered. 3 bedrooms for after the divorces. My stomach twisted violently. I read the message myself. Danielle had written that it was close to a magnet school, just in case they decided to fight for full custody later. Marcus had replied that it was perfect and that they could finally start their real life once they were rid of us. Terrence leaned back against the couch as if the strength had drained from his bones. His eyes were glossy, unfocused. "They weren't just cheating," he said slowly. "They were building a future behind our backs." "Yes," I said, "and planning how to take everything with them." I scrolled to another thread and handed him the phone again. Messages about hiding money, about moving assets into accounts I would never find, about making sure I didn't walk away with half when the divorce happened. Terrence let out a short, broken laugh that held no humor at all. "I worked double shifts," he said. "Extra weekends. I missed birthdays. I thought I was providing for my family." I nodded. Marcus told me he needed more time to focus on work too. He said it was for us. We looked at each other across the living room, bonded now by the same invisible wound. 2 people who had trusted completely and been betrayed completely in return. From upstairs, the door rattled as Marcus pounded on it again. "Nia, open this door," he yelled. "We can fix this. You're making it worse." Terrence stood up so fast the coffee table rattled. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Fix it?" he called toward the ceiling. "You plan to leave her with nothing. You plan to take my children? You don't fix that." The voices upstairs went quiet. For the first time since the door had been locked, there was complete silence. Terrence lowered himself back onto the couch slowly. His face no longer showed confusion or disbelief. What remained was resolve. "They laughed at us in there," he said quietly. "They laughed while they were stealing our lives." I nodded. "They thought we were weak." Terrence's jaw tightened. "Then they chose the wrong people to betray." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything we had lost pressed heavily into the room. But beneath the grief, something else was starting to rise. Clarity. "We need to document everything," I said suddenly. "Every message, every plan. We back it up right now." Terrence met my eyes. "For the lawyers. For the lawyers," I confirmed. At that moment, my phone vibrated on the table beside us. A text from Marcus flashed across the screen. "Please, I'll give you anything. Just unlock the door." I stared at the message for a long moment, then I locked my phone. Terrence picked up the phone again, his hands steadier now than before. He scrolled further back through the messages, moving slower, more carefully, as if bracing himself for whatever else waited beneath the surface. His eyes stopped suddenly, and his entire body stiffened. "They talked about my sons," he said quietly. My chest tightened. "What did they say?" He turned the screen toward me. Danielle had written that the boys were too attached to him, and that it might be easier if they stayed with her once the move happened. Marcus had replied that kids were adaptable and that full custody could be negotiated if the timing was right. Terrence closed his eyes. "They already decided how my children would live. he said. Without me. I felt something shift inside my chest. What had started as heartbreak had transformed into something colder and far stronger. They don't get to decide that, I said firmly. Terrence opened his eyes and nodded. No, they don't. From upstairs, we heard Danielle's voice again, cracked and desperate. She begged through the wood that she was scared, that she couldn't breathe, that this had gone too far. Marcus shouted that we were overreacting, that everything could still be handled privately. Privately? Terrence looked at me. They're still lying. Yes, I said. And now we let the truth speak for itself. He pointed to my phone. Does your phone have a voice recording app? I nodded instantly. I opened the app, my thumb hovering over the red button for a brief second before I pressed it. The soft click of activation felt louder than thunder in my ears. I walked to the bathroom door and knocked once. Marcus, I said calmly. Danielle, I want you to explain something for me. How long have you been together? There was hesitation. Then Marcus spoke. It's complicated. Say how long, I replied. A pause. Then Danielle's shaky voice answered, Since the winter. Since before Christmas. 6 months. Terrence's face hardened. And the plans to move in together? I asked. Marcus exhaled loudly. We talked about possibilities, that's all. The townhouse, Terrence added from behind me. The one near the magnet school? Was that a possibility too? Silence. Then Danielle whispered, Yes. Every word was being recorded. Terrence leaned against the wall beside me, his arms folded tightly across his chest. I could feel the anger radiating off him, contained only by the thin shell of control he was forcing upon himself. And the money? I asked. The accounts you plan to hide? Marcus cursed under his breath. Nia, stop. You're twisting everything. I'm recording everything, I replied evenly. So choose your words carefully. The desperation in their voices grew sharper after that. They promised apologies. They promised to cooperate. They promised they never meant to hurt anyone. Terrence let out a short, humorless laugh. You plan to take my sons, he said quietly through the door. You planned to take her home and her money, but you never planned on getting caught. The door fell silent again. I stepped back from the wood and ended the recording. Terrence looked at me then, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something almost like relief in his eyes. They can't lie their way out now, he said. No, I answered. They can't. Terrence and I went back downstairs and sat at opposite ends of the living room again, the air between us thick with everything we now knew. The house felt unfamiliar, as if it no longer belonged to me. The walls that once felt protective now felt like witnesses. Upstairs, behind the locked door, the murmurs rose and fell like distant echoes in a tunnel. Terrence broke the silence first. We call the lawyers, he said. Right now. I nodded. Mine first, then yours. My attorney answered after the second ring. Her voice was calm and professional, the same as always, and the normality of it nearly brought me to tears. I caught my husband with my neighbor in my bathtub, I said. They admitted to an affair of 6 months. I have messages, I have recordings, and they planned to hide assets. There was a brief pause on the line. Then she said, Nia, this is substantial. Document everything. Do not delete anything, and do not unlock that door until Terrence and I both say it is time. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to protection. Terrence's call to his lawyer was shorter, but no less intense. I heard his voice tighten as he spoke about the children, about custody, about betrayal. When he hung up, his face looked both exhausted and determined. They said the same thing, he told me. Save everything. No confrontations alone. Everything through counsel. From upstairs, Marcus yelled again. Nia! You're ruining everything! Terrence stood up and shouted back, his voice shaking the stairwell. You ruined it when you climbed into that tub with my wife. Silence followed. I looked down at my phone and hesitated for only a second before opening my contacts again. There's one more call I'm making, I said quietly. Terrence raised his eyebrows. Who? Danielle's mother. His expression shifted, surprise flashing across his face. Are you sure? She watched the boys yesterday while Danielle told you she was sick, I said. She deserves to know the truth. The line rang 3 times before a cheerful elderly voice answered. Nia, sweetheart, how are you? My throat tightened. I'm not okay, I answered, and I need to tell you why. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched longer with every word I spoke. When I finished, all that remained was the sound of her uneven breathing. Oh my God, she whispered. I knew something was wrong. I just prayed it wasn't this. I'm sorry, I said. I wish I didn't have to tell you. You did the right thing, she replied softly. The boys deserve the truth, even if it breaks our hearts. When the call ended, Terrence stared at the wall, like a man trying to hold himself upright through sheer will. They're going to be exposed, he said quietly. Yes, I replied, and they know it. The pounding from behind the bathroom door turned into frantic banging. Nia, please, Marcus begged. People are going to find out. Don't do this. I stood up slowly. They already have, I said. The house had fallen into a strange rhythm. Silence from upstairs, interrupted only by the sound of pipes and shallow footsteps behind the locked door. Downstairs, Terrence and I sat in the living room like 2 people waiting for a storm to finally break. I'm calling Marcus's job, Terrence said suddenly. I looked up at him. Are you sure? He nodded. He's been lying about medical appointments, leaving work early, using company time. They deserve to know. I didn't stop him. Terrence stepped into the kitchen for privacy and dialed. I could hear fragments of his conversation through the doorway. Professional tone, calm explanation, the quiet, dangerous voice of a man who no longer had anything left to lose. When he returned, his hands were trembling, but his eyes were steady. They're launching an internal review, he said. They asked for documentation. I sent it. I exhaled slowly. Good. A strange, hollow calm settled over me, the kind that comes when the worst has already happened and all that remains is the aftermath. My phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus. You're destroying me. Please stop. I stared at the words without replying. You're not destroying him, Terrence said quietly when he noticed my expression. You're just lifting the curtain. The pounding started again upstairs. Harder this time. Desperate. Nia, please, Marcus shouted. I'll sign anything you want. Just make this stop. Danielle's voice broke through his. The kids are going to hate me. You're turning everyone against us. I felt something cold and steady lock into place inside my chest. You already did that, I called back through the ceiling. We're just done protecting you. Terrence stood beside me at the foot of the stairs, his arms crossed, his shadow stretched long across the wall. They think reputation is all that matters, he said quietly, but they never thought about character. From upstairs came a long, shaking sob. For the first time, I felt no satisfaction in their suffering. Only finality. My phone vibrated again, a message from my attorney. Do not unlock that door yet. We are preparing emergency filings. Proceed carefully. I showed it to Terrence. He nodded. Mine said the same. We were no longer reacting. We were directing the outcome. Another sound broke through the tension. Sirens in the distance. Faint but approaching. Not for us. Just ordinary life moving on while ours cracked wide open. Terrence looked at me. Are you ready to face them when the time comes? I took a slow breath. No, I answered honestly, but that doesn't mean I won't. Upstairs, the arguing had stopped again. The silence now felt heavier than all the shouting before it. The moment was approaching. Time stretched in unnatural ways after that. Minutes felt like hours. Every sound in the house seemed magnified. The ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall, the faint creak of the floor as Terrence shifted his weight, the distant rush of water still running upstairs. They had not turned it off. It was as if they were clinging to that small illusion of normalcy behind the door. Terrence paced slowly across the living room, his boots heavy against the hardwood. I stayed seated, my hands folded in my lap, my mind moving through everything that had already happened and everything that was about to unfold. "They're waiting for us to crack," he said quietly. "They think if they wait long enough, we'll unlock the door out of guilt." "They don't know us anymore," I replied. We both fell silent. After a while, my phone vibrated again. Another message from my attorney. The words were short and direct. "You may unlock the door when you feel safe. Record everything. Do not engage emotionally." I showed the message to Terrence. He nodded once. "It's time then," he said. My chest tightened, but I stood up. The fear was still there, buried somewhere beneath everything else, but it no longer had control over me. What moved me now was something stronger than fear. Certainty. We climbed the stairs together side by side. The hallway felt colder than before. The light from the bedroom spilled out across the carpet, faint and yellow. The bathroom door stood at the end of the corridor like a sealed vault. Behind it, silence. I raised my hand and knocked once. "There are rules now," I said clearly. "You will listen. You will not interrupt. You will not lie. When the door opens, you do exactly what you are told." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse. "We understand." Danielle said nothing. I slipped the key from my pocket. The metal felt colder than I expected as I wrapped my fingers around it. For a brief second, my old life flashed through my mind. Sunday mornings, shared dinners, borrowed sugar, careless trust. All of it belonged to someone I no longer was. I turned the key. The lock clicked. The sound echoed down the hallway like the firing of a weapon. I stepped back. The door opened slowly, the steam from the shower spilling into the hallway, as if their secret life were exhaling for the last time. Marcus emerged first, wrapped in one of the white bath towels from our linen closet. His face looked smaller somehow, stripped of arrogance, lined with panic. Danielle followed behind him, clutching the same towel around her body. Her skin was pale. Her eyes were red and swollen. She could not look at Terrence. They stood there in the wreckage of their secrecy, exposed in every possible way. Terrence took one step forward. "For the first time in your lives," he said, his voice calm and terrifying, "you're going to hear the truth without a chance to rewrite it." Marcus opened his mouth as if to speak, but Terrence lifted a hand sharply. "No," he said. "You had 6 months to talk. Now you listen." Marcus closed his mouth again. Danielle clutched her towel tighter, her fingers trembling so hard the fabric shook. She looked at the floor, then at Terrence, then immediately back at the floor. Shame rolled off her in silent waves. I stood beside Terrence, not behind him. Beside. For the first time since this began, I felt like a person standing in her own power, not the wounded wife they expected to crumble. "Sit," I said, pointing to the edge of the bed. They obeyed instantly. The mattress dipped under their weight, the same mattress Marcus and I had shared for nearly a decade. Now it felt like contaminated ground. Marcus's damp towel left a wet imprint on the comforter, a final insult to what had once been a sanctuary. Terrence crossed his arms and leaned against the dresser, blocking their only exit. "You're going to explain?" he said. "Not justify, not soften. Explain." Danielle swallowed hard. "Terrence, baby, Stop," he said. "You lost the right to call me that." Her lips pressed together in a thin, trembling line. Marcus looked at me with pleading eyes. "Nia, we can work through this. Counseling, mediation. I made a mistake." One mistake? I repeated. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It landed like steel. 6 months of lying, planning, hiding money, laughing at me behind my back. You planned a divorce without telling me. You planned your future with her? Marcus's jaw tightened. It wasn't like that. I took out my phone, pressed play on the recording, and let their own voices fill the room. We fell in love. Once I'm free of her, custody won't be a problem. She's too trusting to notice anything. Every word hit them like a blow. Danielle started shaking her head violently. We were talking, that's all. People say stupid things when they're emotional. 6 months worth of stupid things? Terrence asked. 6 months worth of planning behind our backs? She opened her mouth again, then closed it when she realized there was no excuse left to cling to. I stepped closer. What hurts the most, I said quietly, isn't the betrayal. It's that you both assumed we were fools, that we were blind, that we'd never have the strength to face you. Marcus looked at me as if seeing a stranger. Nia, please. But the man who had taken vows with me 8 years ago was gone. In his place sat someone who had gambled everything on deceit and lost. I straightened my shoulders. You have 10 minutes to get dressed, I said. Then you leave this house. Marcus, you can return tomorrow with a police escort to collect essentials. Nothing more. Danielle gasped. You can't do that? Terrence cut her off, his voice like a storm contained in a single sentence. You don't tell either of us what we can or can't do anymore. Marcus looked between us, his desperation turning into something darker. Fear. Nia, he whispered, are you really ending this? Yes, I said. You ended it months ago. I'm simply finalizing the paperwork. They both stared at us, stripped of their lies, stripped of their confidence, stripped of the future they thought they had secured in secret. Every illusion they had relied on was gone. For the first time all day, I saw it fully in their eyes. They were afraid. The room moved again, slowly this time, as if the shock had finally released them from paralysis. Marcus stood first, clutching the edge of the dresser for balance, before turning toward the closet. Danielle followed him a second later, her bare feet silent against the carpet, her towel still wrapped tightly around her body, like armor she no longer trusted. You don't have to do this, Marcus said over his shoulder. We can handle this like adults. Terrence didn't answer. I didn't either. They dressed in strained silence. Drawers opened and closed. Hangers scraped along the metal rod. Danielle's quiet sobs slipped through the room, despite her attempts to contain them. Marcus kept glancing towards me, as if waiting for my resolve to falter. It didn't. When they emerged from the closet, they looked like shadows of the people they once were. Marcus wore jeans and a wrinkled shirt, pulled on in haste. Danielle had found a loose sweater and leggings. Neither of them looked at each other anymore. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Nia, I'll transfer money tonight. We can negotiate privately. There's no need for lawyers to tear everything apart. I shook my head slowly. You already tried to negotiate privately, with lies. Danielle took a hesitant step toward Terrence. Please, she whispered, think about the boys. I made a mistake. I can fix it. Terrence's voice was steady, but something in it had twisted beyond forgiveness. You didn't make a mistake, he said. You made a series of choices, and now you live with them. Her shoulders collapsed inward as if the words had physically pushed her down. Marcus turned to me again. 8 years, he said. Does that really mean nothing to you now? I met his eyes without flinching. It meant everything, I replied. That's why what you did means there's nothing left to save. For a moment, his face showed something like regret. Then it hardened into resentment. You think you've won? He said quietly. I think I've survived, I answered. There's a difference. Terrence stepped toward the door and opened it wide. Cold afternoon air rushed into the hallway like a final verdict. Time. he said simply. Danielle hesitated on the threshold. Her gaze flicked between us one last time, searching for mercy where none remained. Then she stepped outside. Marcus followed. The front door closed behind them with a sound that felt heavier than wood and metal. It sounded like a chapter ending. Terrence and I stood in silence for a long moment, listening to their footsteps retreat down the walkway, listening to the engine start, listening to the life we had known disappear down the street. Only when the sound was gone did the tension finally leave my chest. Terrence exhaled slowly. "Is it strange," he asked, "that I feel calmer now than at any other moment today?" I nodded. "No, it makes sense." The lies stopped living in the walls. He turned to me then, something like respect in his eyes. "You didn't fall apart." I thought about the woman I had been that morning, the careful one, the trusting one, the one who believed stability was the same as safety. "She's gone," I said, "but I think I like who replaced her." After the front door closed and their car disappeared from the street, the house felt unnaturally still. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you're forced to acknowledge it. Terrence and I remained standing in the hallway for a few seconds longer, as if our bodies needed proof that this moment was real and final. Then the shaking started. It came suddenly, without permission. My hands trembled, my knees weakened. The rush of adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation evaporated all at once, leaving behind raw, exposed nerves. I lowered myself onto the edge of the couch and covered my face with my hands. Terrence didn't speak. He simply sat on the opposite side of the room, giving me space, understanding without needing explanation. "I'm not breaking," I said finally, my voice quiet. "I just need to let it move through me." He nodded once. "I know." Outside, daylight was fading. The sky dimmed from pale blue to soft gray. Inside, the house felt like it was holding its breath. After a few minutes, I stood up again. "I'm changing the locks tonight," I said. Terrence looked at his watch. "I'll stay until the locksmith comes." The waiting felt long, but it was grounding, practical, tangible, something I could control. When the locksmith arrived, I stood beside him as he worked, listening to the click and turn of new mechanisms sliding into place. Each sound felt like another layer of protection sealing over my life. When he finished, he handed me the new keys. They were heavier than the old ones. Terrence watched silently as I tested the locks on every door. Front, back, balcony. When I was done, I leaned back against the wall and finally let out a long, unrestrained breath. "It's really over," I said. "Yes," he replied. "It is." Terrence left shortly after that. We stood on the porch for a moment under the dim porch light. "Tomorrow will be worse," he said gently. "Grief always is." "I know," I answered, "but tomorrow will also be mine." He nodded with quiet respect, then turned and walked to his truck. When I re-entered the house, the weight of solitude settled over me for the first time. I walked through every room slowly. The living room where laughter once lived. The kitchen where lies once passed across the table. The bathroom upstairs where trust had been desecrated. I did not cry there. Instead, I returned to the bedroom, stripped the bed completely, and carried the sheets to the washing machine as if I were removing evidence from a crime scene. The steady hum of the washer felt strangely comforting. When I finally lay down that night, the bed felt enormous and unfamiliar. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused rest. Images replayed in fragments. Steam, voices, messages, towels, the sound of the door closing. At some point, close to dawn, I finally slept. And when I woke, for the first time in 8 years, no one was waiting for me on the other side of the bed. The absence was heavy, but it was also quiet. The days that followed moved in slow, uneven waves. Some hours passed in a blur. Others stretched so painfully long that I wondered if time itself had decided to punish me alongside the people who had betrayed me. Sleep came in short fragments. Food lost its taste. Even sunlight through the windows felt different. as if the house no longer recognized me. On the morning after everything happened, I met my attorney in person, sitting across from her in a sterile conference room. I listened as she laid out my options with calm precision. Emergency filings, asset freezes, temporary living arrangements. She moved through the process the way surgeons move through procedures. Precise, detached, focused on outcomes. "You did the right thing by recording everything," she told me. "Not many people think that clearly under pressure." I nodded, though my chest felt hollow. Clear thinking had not felt like strength at the time. It had felt like survival. Terrence kept in steady contact with me as well. His attorney had already initiated custody discussions. He told me the boys were with him, confused, scared, but safe. Their mother had not yet explained anything to them. "She will," he said quietly, "sooner than she thinks." By the third day, the rumors began. Neighbors stopped waving. Some stared openly. Others avoided looking at me entirely. The story moved faster than truth ever does. Pieces of it twisted into speculation. Some people blamed Danielle more. Some blamed Marcus. A few, disturbingly, found ways to blame me. I learned that Marcus had been placed on leave from his company. What had begun as an internal investigation quickly turned into formal disciplinary action. His misuse of work hours, falsified schedules, and dishonest reporting were now documented with the same care he once reserved for hiding his affair. Danielle's workplace reacted differently, but no less severely. She was suspended pending review. The car that once sat confidently in her driveway stayed parked and unmoved for days. Terrence told me she had moved into a temporary rental across town. "They're not together anymore," he said one afternoon. "Not really. They're blaming each other." Some small, distant part of me registered that information, but it brought no satisfaction. What mattered most to me was not what they had lost. It was what I had regained. On the fourth day, Marcus's attorney called mine. He wanted to negotiate. He wanted privacy. He wanted damage control. My lawyer listened politely, then declined. "The evidence speaks clearly," she told him. "There is nothing to negotiate outside the legal process." When she relayed the message to me, I felt a strange, quiet peace settle in my chest. For the first time in years, Marcus's urgency no longer controlled my responses. That same evening, I received a message from Danielle. "I never meant to hurt you. I hope one day you can forgive me." I stared at the words for a long time before powering my phone off. Forgiveness was not a priority. Stability was, truth was, and the slow rebuilding of a life that had once been dismantled behind my back. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way movies portray heartbreak. There were no screaming matches, no sudden revenge scenes, no public scandals played out on my front lawn. Instead, there was something quieter, harder, a slow confrontation with the emptiness left behind when a life you trusted disappears. I returned to work after several days. My coworkers treated me with a careful, fragile kindness, as if I were made of glass. Some avoided the subject entirely. Others squeezed my hand in passing. I did my job. I reviewed claims. I answered emails. I pretended that my world had not split into a before and an after. At night, the house felt too large. Every sound echoed. Every shadow carried memory. I started sleeping with the television on just to avoid the weight of silence pressing against my chest. Terrence checked in often. Short messages, simple questions, no pressure, no expectations. Just reminders that I was not alone in the wreckage. One evening, while standing in the kitchen holding a mug of untouched tea, I realized something unsettling. I was no longer waiting for Marcus to call. The realization startled me more than any of the betrayals. I had spent years measuring my emotional world around his presence, his moods, his schedule, his approval. Now, that axis was gone, and in its absence, I was beginning to feel something fragile and unfamiliar. Freedom. It didn't feel triumphant. It didn't feel empowering in the way speeches describe. It felt quiet. cautious, like the first breath after being underwater for too long. I began making small changes. I rearranged the living room furniture. I took down photos that hurt too much to see. I started cooking meals I liked instead of meals built around compromise. I signed up for a weekend pottery class on a whim, something Marcus had always mocked as unproductive. The clay felt grounding in my hands. Therapy became part of my routine as well. There, I learned words for things I had lived with for years without naming: gaslighting, emotional minimization, control disguised as concern. Patterns I had accepted as normal simply because they arrived quietly. Healing was not linear. Some mornings I woke up steady. Other days, grief hit without warning. But the difference now was this: I no longer questioned whether I deserved better. By the time the divorce proceedings formally began, I was no longer the woman who had walked into that bathroom months earlier. I was not fearless, I was not untouched, but I was awake, and that changed everything. The divorce did not unfold with screaming arguments or dramatic courtroom scenes like in the movies. Instead, it moved forward with calculated steps, paperwork, and cold legal language that stripped our marriage down to numbers, assets, and signatures. By the time everything became official, several months had already passed since the day I found my husband in that bathtub. Marcus tried, in the beginning, to regain some control over the process. Through his attorney, he pushed for mediation, delays, and compromises that would benefit him financially. But the evidence spoke louder than any strategy. The messages, the recordings, the documented plans to hide money, all of it worked against him. In the end, the settlement was clear and firm. He could not shield what he had planned to take. The townhouse stayed mine. The accounts he had tried to move were recovered. His attempt at manipulation became his greatest liability. When the final papers were signed, I did not feel victory. I felt closure. Terrence's case unfolded differently. His priority was always the boys. And the documentation of Danielle's plans, paired with her sudden instability after the exposure of the affair, shifted the balance heavily in his favor. Custody arrangements were restructured. His sons spent most of their time with him now, their lives anchored to honesty instead of secrecy. Danielle did not vanish from the world, but the life she had envisioned with Marcus never materialized. Their relationship did not survive the public collapse. Without secrecy, without stolen moments, they had nothing holding them together but resentment and fear. Marcus attempted to contact me more than once after the divorce was finalized. Long messages, apologies that arrived far too late, explanations that sounded rehearsed. I never answered. Silence became my final boundary. One afternoon, nearly a year after everything had happened, I ran into him at a grocery store. He looked older, smaller, as if the weight of his choices had settled permanently into his shoulders. He opened his mouth to say my name, then stopped. I nodded once in acknowledgement and walked past him without slowing down. That moment told me everything I needed to know. I had moved on. What once felt like the end of my life had quietly transformed into its beginning. The betrayal did not define me. My response to it did. 2 years have passed since that ordinary Tuesday that divided my life into a before and an after. The woman I was back then would not recognize the woman I am now. Not because I became harder or colder, but because I finally became real. The house is different now, not just in furniture or paint, but in energy. The walls no longer hold secrets. The rooms no longer echo with tension. I filled the shelves with books I always wanted to read but never took time for. The walls now carry my own artwork from the pottery and painting classes I once took only as an experiment. What began as therapy became a passion. Freedom changed the way I moved through the world. I travel now, alone, with friends, without asking permission. I learned how to sit in silence without feeling abandoned by it. I learned how to trust my instincts instead of questioning them into submission. I learned that safety does not come from routine. It comes from truth. Terrence rebuilt his life as well, stronger than before. He learned how to parent alone, how to grieve without becoming bitter, how to stand firm without becoming cruel. His sons laugh again. They found stability and honesty, even though it came through loss. And Marcus? He faded from my life the way shadows do at sunrise. Quietly, inevitably, without resistance. I no longer wonder who he is with or what he regrets. Indifference became the final release I never anticipated but deeply needed. If you listened to the end, thank you. It means more to me than you know. And before we finish, if you're still here, write in the comments. Where are you watching us from? I'll read every message. Sometimes people ask me if I would change that day if I could. If I would choose not to go home for those documents. If I would turn away from the door. The answer is no. Because that moment, as brutal as it was, gave me something I might otherwise have spent my entire life searching for. My voice, my boundaries, my freedom. The betrayal broke the illusion I lived inside, but it also broke the cage I did not even know I was trapped in. I did not win by punishing anyone. I won by refusing to remain small. My story is not about revenge. It is about awakening. It is about discovering that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the first honest thing that ever does. And that when everything falls apart, you are not always being destroyed. Sometimes you are being rebuilt. For another story that fits your mood, click the video on the left. To hear the latest one, choose the video on the right.
My dad didn't just miss a birthday or a school ceremony. He missed my wedding. The one day I begged him to show up. The one day his absence echoed louder than the vows I spoke. I remember standing at the end of the aisle, my bouquet trembling, staring at the empty chair where he should have been. No text, no excuse, just silence. The kind of silence you carry for years. I told myself I was done needing him. Done, hoping he'd ever choose me. But everything changed the morning my hotel chain hit a $580 million valuation and every business network flashed my name across their screens. Suddenly, my phone lit up with the message I once would have cried for. Family dinner at 7 p.m., important discussion. Funny thing is, he didn't show up for my wedding, but I showed up for that dinner, with something he never saw coming. People think a broken family is loud. Shouting, slammed doors, chaos. Mine was quiet, uncomfortably quiet. My dad, Richard Collins, never needed to raise his voice. His absence made enough noise on its own. He moved through our Seattle house like a storm cloud dressed in a tailored suit, dark, cold, impossible to read. And somehow, everything revolved around him, even when he wasn't there. My mother, Evelyn, floated after him like a ghost wearing pearls. "Honey, your father's under a lot of pressure," she'd whisper whenever he missed another recital, another award ceremony. "Be understanding, understanding." That was the word used to excuse every wound. My older brother, Ethan, was sunshine by comparison, Dad's golden boy. Football star, straight teeth, perfect handshake. The son my father proudly introduced to his business partners, while I lingered behind with my notebooks and quiet dreams. Once, when I was 12, I gathered the courage to ask Dad why he never came to my events. He didn't even look up from his laptop. "Because, Hannah, I'm building a future for this family. You should be grateful. Grateful. For being invisible." I learned young that love in my house came with conditions, and I never seemed to meet them. So I did what forgotten daughters often do. I built a world inside my own head, one where I would someday earn a place in his line of sight. I just didn't know that to finally be seen, I'd have to become someone entirely different. People like to say your wedding day is the happiest day of your life. Mine started that way until it didn't. I remember standing in the bridal suite, veil pinned, lipstick perfect, hands trembling just enough to betray the calm I tried so hard to fake. Every few minutes, I checked my phone, not for texts from friends, not for last-minute vendor updates, but for one message. One simple line from Dad, "I'm on my way." It never came. 10 minutes before the ceremony, my screen lit up. My heart leaped, until I saw the sender. "Dad, can't make it. Important meeting." No apology. No explanation. Just another transaction-like message, as if skipping my wedding was equivalent to postponing a conference call. My breath caught, but I smiled for the bridesmaid's sake. I'd learned long ago how to hold pain quietly. When the doors opened and the music began, I walked down the aisle alone. Guests whispered, assuming maybe it was symbolic, some modern, empowered statement. Daniel, my husband, reached for my hands when I arrived at the altar. His eyes softened. Hannah, he whispered, you don't have to pretend you're okay. That was the worst part. I had been pretending for so long that I wasn't sure if I knew how to stop. After the reception, when the laughter faded and the lights dimmed, I sat beside Daniel on the hotel balcony overlooking the city. He could have tried, I murmured. One day, Daniel said gently. He'll regret it. I wasn't so sure. In that moment, looking at the empty streets below, something inside me shifted. Not a clean break, more like a slow, silent unraveling. I finally understood. If my father couldn't show up for my wedding, he'd never show up for anything that didn't benefit him. What I didn't know was that he would show up, but only when I became worth $500 million. After the wedding, something hardened in me. Not bitterness, but resolve. If Dad's absence taught me anything, it's that waiting for approval is a slow form of self-destruction. So, I stopped waiting. I dove headfirst into the only thing that ever made sense to me. Hospitality. Not the dusty old motels Dad glorified, but modern, intentional spaces. Places where people actually felt seen. My first property was a disaster. A past its prime lodge outside Portland, with mold under the wallpaper and carpets that smelled like rain-soaked socks. But it was mine. The bank manager looked at me like I was insane when I signed the papers. "You're sure about this?" he asked. A polite way of saying, "You're too young, too inexperienced, too female." I simply nodded. "I'm sure." What I didn't tell him was that failure wasn't an option. Not when every part of me needed to prove I wasn't the fragile, emotional daughter my father dismissed. So I scrubbed floors at midnight, wrote marketing plans at dawn, hired staff only when I could afford them, which wasn't often. Some nights I slept behind the front desk on a blanket because going home felt like admitting defeat. During one brutal winter storm, when the power went out across the whole property, I spent 4 hours in the freezing dark guiding guests with a flashlight and apologizing for things I had no control over. I cried exactly once, quietly, in the boiler room, before wiping my face and getting back to work. By year 3, that old lodge had a waiting list every weekend. By year 5, I expanded to 2 more locations. Intimate, minimalist, eco-focused retreats that travelers raved about online. Investors called. Interviewers requested features. Competitors tried to replicate my model. But my father? Not a word. Not a text. Not even a secondhand comment from Ethan. It was like building a skyscraper in the middle of a desert. Tall, gleaming, and completely unseen by the one person I had once hoped would look. Then came the morning everything changed. The morning my CFO stormed into my office, breathless, eyes wide. "Hannah," she said, her voice trembling. The valuation came in. I felt my pulse spike. "Well?" She grinned. $580 million. I froze, not out of shock, but because the first image in my mind, I was that empty chair at my wedding. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to cry. I felt powerful. What I didn't know was that miles away, my father had just read the same headline. And for the first time in years, he finally remembered he had a daughter. The morning the valuation hit the headlines, my office buzzed like a beehive. Every phone rang, every email notification pinged. Every congratulatory message from partners, investors, journalists, it all blurred together in a warm, surreal haze. But the moment I'll never forget is much quieter. I was alone in my office, staring at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, when my phone buzzed again. I thought it'd be another reporter, maybe a friend. It wasn't. Dad. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He hadn't texted me in almost 3 years. With a shaky hand, I unlocked my phone. "Dad. Family dinner at 7 p.m. Important discussion. No, congratulations. No, proud of you." Not even my name. It read like a command, like I had been summoned to a board meeting. I stared at the screen so long my eyes blurred. Daniel walked in with 2 coffees and paused when he saw my face. "What happened?" I showed him the message. His jaw tightened. "He didn't reach out when your company hit $10M. Not at $50M. Not even at $200M, but $580M? I swallowed. "He wants something." "Then don't go," Daniel said gently. But the thing is, I had to go. Not for him. For me. I needed to see what he looked like when he finally realized I no longer needed his approval. When I arrived at home, I found my CFO, Lena, waiting in the driveway. She lifted a folder. "You should see this before tonight." My stomach dropped. Inside were pages of financial reports, loan defaults, contractor disputes, foreclosure notices, all tied to my father's real estate properties. "Your dad's empire is collapsing," Lena said softly. "Badly. He's months behind on everything." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "So, that's why he texted me," I whispered. "Not to reconcile. Not to fix anything. Just to use me." Lena hesitated. "There's more. The lenders are panicking. They're willing to sell the entire debt portfolio at a fraction of its value." A slow, unfamiliar calm spread through me. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. "Buy it," I said. Lena blinked. "All of it?" "Yes," I said. "Every last dollar he owes." Because if my father wanted a family meeting, he was about to meet a very different version of his daughter. Lena didn't flinch when I told her to buy the entire debt portfolio. That's why she was my CFO. She didn't question my sanity until after the job was already done. By midnight, we sat surrounded by paperwork, laptops, signature packets, and black coffee that tasted like burnt determination. Every sheet of paper represented another piece of my father's collapsing kingdom. At 2:13 a.m., Lena looked up with tired eyes. "Hannah, once this is finalized, you'll own everything your father ever built. Are you ready for that?" I inhaled slowly. "I'm not doing this to hurt him," I said. "I'm doing this because he expects me to save him without ever seeing me." She nodded. "You're buying control, not revenge." By sunrise, the lenders had signed. By noon, the legal team confirmed the transfer. By late afternoon, my father's debts, his hotels, his land, his once sacred legacy were officially under my authority. I expected triumph, some electric spark of victory. Instead, I felt quiet, like the kind of quiet when a storm pulls back before it hits. That evening, I went to the closet and pulled out clothes I rarely wore: a fitted black dress, a tailored coat, heels that made my posture straighten with unintentional authority. This wasn't about looking powerful. It was about no longer shrinking. Daniel watched me fasten my earrings. "You're nervous," he said gently. I didn't deny it. "I'm not nervous about seeing him," I replied. "I'm nervous I might still care." He stepped closer, his voice soft. "Hannah, caring doesn't make you weak. Letting him keep hurting you does." I exhaled shakily. Tonight wasn't about pleasing my father. Tonight was about facing him with the truth he had spent a lifetime ignoring. On the drive over, the city lights blurred into streaks through my windshield. My mind drifted back to all the times he dismissed me. "Focus on something simpler, Hannah. You're not cut out for real business. This industry is too big for you." I used to internalize every word. I used to think success would prove him wrong. But holding the documents in my bag, the contracts giving me full legal claim over his empire, I realized something. I didn't need to prove anything. I already had. When I pulled into the country club parking lot, my phone buzzed again. A text from Mom. "Mom, please be kind to your father tonight. He's under stress." My chest tightened. Even now, after everything, they still expected me to shrink, to bend, to soothe the ego of the man who never once protected mine. Not tonight. I slipped my phone into my purse, locked the car, and stood taller than I ever had. Because tonight, I wasn't the girl he ignored. I wasn't the bride he abandoned. I wasn't the daughter he forgot. I was the woman who owned the future he was about to beg for. And he had no idea. The country club's private dining room was lit with warm amber lights. Too soft, too elegant for what was about to happen. I pushed the door open, and 4 faces snapped toward me. Dad, Mom, Ethan, Uncle Mark. All sitting at a perfectly set table with expensive wine they definitely couldn't afford anymore. Dad leaned back in his chair like a CEO waiting to discipline an employee. "Hannah," he said, not smiling. "You're late." I closed the door behind me. "No," I said calmly. "I arrived exactly when I meant to." Mom flinched at my tone. Dad's eyebrow twitched, but he didn't comment. "Sit," he ordered. "We have things to discuss." I didn't move. "I know why I'm here," Ethan scoffed. "Then let's skip the dramatics. Dad's business is in trouble, big trouble. And you are doing exceptionally well." Dad finished for him, his voice smooth but sharp. Your company's valuation proves you have the means to help your family. Help your family. Not I'm proud of you. Not congratulations. Just expectation. Entitlement. I stepped closer to the table. So this dinner, I said, is about money. Mom clasped her hands. Hannah, sweetheart, your father is failing, I interrupted. Financially, operationally, completely. Dad's expression darkened. We hit a rough patch, that's all. With your support, we can stabilize the properties until… You mean the properties you haven't paid contractors on for months? I asked. The loans you defaulted on? The ones already scheduled for liquidation? Ethan's eyes widened. Dad stiffened. Uncle Mark cleared his throat nervously. Dad hissed. How do you know about that? I placed my bag on an empty chair and pulled out the thick folder Lena prepared. Because, I said, sliding it across the table, I now own every dollar of your debt. Dad blinked. What did you just say? Ethan grabbed the folder, flipped it open, and his face drained of color. Dad, he whispered, this is real. She bought everything. Mom clutched her chest. Oh my God. Hannah, why would you do that? Dad slammed his palms on the table. How dare you interfere in my business? I remained steady. You summoned me here for help. This is help. This is control, Dad roared. You're trying to take what's mine. I met his fury with complete stillness. I didn't take it. You lost it. I just got there first. Ethan stood. You're unbelievable. Dad built everything we have. Everything you have, I corrected. I built mine on my own. Mom was crying now. Hannah, please. Your father is under so much pressure. He's been working so hard. I snapped. He didn't even come to my wedding. Silence slammed into the room. Dad's jaw tightened. That was unfortunate timing. No, I said sharply. Unfortunate timing is traffic. Missing your daughter's wedding is a choice. You conmated Kenston was mean. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. This isn't about family. It's about money. You ignored me for years until I became valuable. Mom whispered. That's not true. Then why? I asked quietly. Did he text me only after he saw that $580M headline? Why not when I opened my first hotel? Or my second? Or at my wedding? Why now? Dad's voice cracked not with sorrow, but with anger. You owe this family. I slammed my hand on the table so hard the wine glasses rattled. I owe you nothing. They all froze. My voice was shaking but strong. I begged for your love for years. I worked myself into the ground trying to become someone you'd finally show up for. And when I succeeded on my own, you didn't congratulate me. You summoned me. Dad's eyes narrowed. So what now? You want to humiliate us? Destroy everything I built? I reached into the folder and pulled out a single envelope. I'm giving you a path out, I said. 30 days to vacate all properties. After that, my company takes full operational control. Mom sobbed. Please, Hannah, don't do this. Dad stared at me, not with fatherly sadness, but with the stunned realization that he no longer held power over me. You're no daughter of mine, he whispered. Finally, the truth spoken aloud. I straightened my posture, lifted my chin. No, I said quietly, and you made sure of that years ago. Then I picked up my purse, turned my back on all of them, and walked toward the door. Behind me, chairs scraped, someone shouted my name. My mother wailed, but nothing touched me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't leaving, wishing they'd follow me. I was leaving knowing they couldn't stop me. The night air hit me like a wave the moment I stepped outside the country club. Cool, open, free. For a second, I just stood there on the stone steps, my chest rising and falling as if I had been underwater for years and finally surfaced. Behind the doors, I could still hear muffled yelling, my father furious, my mother crying, Ethan trying to salvage whatever scraps of control they thought they still had. But none of it reached me. Daniel was waiting in the car. When he saw my face, he didn't ask what happened. He just took my hand as I slid into the passenger seat. You okay? He asked softly. I stared out the window at the glowing waterfront lights. I thought it would hurt more. Did it? I shook my head. It felt like walking out of a prison I didn't realize I'd been serving a life sentence in. The next morning, sunlight flooded my kitchen, warm and gentle, nothing like the harsh office lighting I'd grown accustomed to. The folder containing every document from last night sat on the counter. Before, I would have dreaded opening something like that. Now? It looked like freedom bound in paper. Lena called at 9 a.m. "The transition is complete," she said. "You're officially in control of all assets." I closed my eyes, letting that reality sink in, not the ownership, not the power, but the finality. "Thank you," I whispered. She hesitated. "Are you doing okay? Really okay?" I surprised both of us by smiling. "I think I've never been better." The next weeks were a blur of movement, but different from before, lighter, steadier. I toured each of Dad's failing properties with my team, where he saw crumbling walls, outdated decor, stained carpets. I saw possibility. "We can turn this into a wellness retreat," I told the designers. "Make it calm, healing, intentional." It felt symbolic, transforming the ruins of my father's empire into places built on peace, not power. One afternoon, as I stood in the lobby of what would soon become our flagship retreat, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass door. Black blazer, hair pulled back, eyes steady, without fear or doubt. A woman who outgrew the smallness she was raised in. I didn't look like the girl who once cried alone in a bridal suite, waiting for a father who never came. I didn't look like the daughter who begged for love that always came with conditions. I looked whole. My family didn't contact me, not once. But the silence didn't sting this time. It simply existed like background noise in a place I no longer lived. Ethan posted vague quotes on social media about betrayal. Mom left 2 voicemails crying but never apologizing. Dad? Nothing. His pride was too loud for words. And yet, for the first time, their reactions didn't pull me back into old wounds. They didn't define me. They didn't matter. Because I finally understood that walking away wasn't abandonment. It was self-rescue. It was giving myself what my father never gave me. Permission to choose a life not shaped by his absence, but by my presence. People assume that success heals every wound, that once your name appears on headlines beside a number like $580 million, all the emptiness disappears. But that's not how healing works. That's not how love works either. The truth is, nothing changed the day my company hit that valuation. Not really. What changed was the moment I walked out of that country club, leaving behind the voices that had shaped my childhood, the expectations that had crushed my confidence, the silence that had followed me into adulthood like a shadow. For the first time, I didn't walk away wishing things had been different. I walked away accepting that they weren't. And that acceptance felt liberating. A few weeks later, I visited one of the newly renovated properties. Soft music played in the lobby. Sunlight filtered through warm oak paneling. Guests laughed quietly over tea. It felt peaceful, like a place built for someone who had spent too many years holding her breath. My breath. Daniel joined me by the window, slipping his hand into mine. "Looks like a fresh start," he said. I nodded, watching the wind sway the trees outside. "It is," I whispered. "Not for the business for me?" Because I finally understood something I had chased my entire life without realizing. Love that has to be earned is not love. Family that only appears when you're useful is not family. And approval that comes with conditions is not approval at all. I didn't need to fix my father. I didn't need to win him. I didn't need him to see me. I needed to see myself. So, if you ask me what the real turning point was, it wasn't the valuation. It wasn't the debt acquisition. It wasn't even the dinner showdown. It was the moment I realized I wasn't broken for wanting a father who could never be one. I was human. And the moment I chose myself over the people who kept choosing my usefulness, I didn't lose a family. I reclaimed my life. And that was worth more than $580 million.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment in the story has touched your heart, brought you some reflection, some emotion, and hope. Thank you for taking the time to experience it with us, and hope that each next story will always accompany you on your life journey.